All right. Well, hi. My name is Cris Vlek. I am here today because this is an important thing to Spaulding. First thing you should probably know about me is I'm a massive introvert and I don't like talking about myself, but I'm here. I'm here because this is important to Spaulding, and I actually really believe in what Spaulding is doing. So I am going to get outside of my uncomfortableness and outside of my own skin suit for a little bit and help Spaulding out because this is an important thing to do. Um, and what we are doing is massively important. Not only are we building for production studios and building a hotel and building several different things, but we're building for the future. I think one thing that a lot of people can agree on is the world is in quite a state of flux these days. And when we come through this, uh, whatever you want to call it, tyranny or confusion, whatever side you want to land on, the world is somewhat divided these days, and we're building for something in the future. We know the future is bright. We know that the future is coming soon. We know that we're going to get through whatever it is difficult times we're through. Uh, and then when we do, people will be looking for something bolder, brighter, and they'll be looking to a new future. And Spalding is working on that right now. And I've been here since June and caught the vision right away. And I really believe in what the people are doing. It's a wonderful set of people. They're all talented. They're all positive, and we are. When I say we, my partner Jody and I, who both signed on at the same time, we are so honored to be a part of this, and tickled that we would even be asked. So why am I here? What do I do? I am an associate producer, so I help move scripts through. I help get the movies going. I help productions move forward under somebody, the producer, and that's Khalil and Christine and Damien and that whole team over there. I help out with that stuff. I'm also helping getting the publishing arm of Spalding up and running, and on top of all that, I'm a writer. So I spend most of my days writing new scripts for Spalding so they can take them to investors and show them the production plate that we have going. So I spend a lot of my days at my desk, obviously chained to my desk writing. So I'm tickled to be here, at least getting out of the house and talking to people and not just staring at my desk and my computer. They would like to talk about my past and where I came from and what brought me to here. I think all of my roads from a young boy till now have led here. Most of my paths that I've taken all had something to do with the production industry and writing and communications. Even when I was a little kid, one of my friends had band posters up and their favorite musicians up. I was heavily invested in comedians. My favorite stars were all comedians, and that's all I ever wanted to do when I was a kid was just grow up and do stand up comedy. I ended up doing that for a while, and it turns out that I just don't like being on the stage. I don't like being on the in the public eye. So I do what I can behind the scenes more than I am on stage, even though I have a podcast as well. The most things that I like to do are behind the camera, and so that's what makes this here today not my favorite moment, but again, it's important to other people. So yeah, when I was a young kid, I would act and I would make up sketches and I would perform. When my parents had a dinner party, I would perform, and I'm sure that was more of an annoyance than an entertainment to them at the when I was young. Um, so I ended up getting into theater for the first time when I was 20. And I joined a church, and that they thought, well, we need some more actors for whatever it is they do. For did a little plays and sketches they did on Sunday mornings, and then bigger plays, bigger 2 hour long theater plays they did on special occasions. And I joined them, and that was the first time I ever stepped up on stage, and went from there. I started writing my own theater. I started doing stand up comedy, and I did that for a good 10 years. But I'll let you know a secret for those people who really want to get into theater. Theater doesn't pay much usually, unless you're in Broadway. You're gonna do it for the love of the theater. You're not gonna do it because you're making a massive amount of money in a career. So I ended up getting into video production and thought that if we're doing sketches and we're doing plays and we're doing theater, I may as well have it on video because then it's there forever. So I'm self-taught. I bought myself video equipment and I just learned and learned and learned. And I cut my teeth on doing video production and photography, and then I also learned how to do post production. So that's where I really love to spend most of my time is post production, editing, special effects. I love doing that stuff more than I do the shooting. And but outside of that, my first love is again writing. So when I couldn't make a lot of money doing theater and video productions for my own passion projects, I ended up turning to the commercial side. So I did video production for weddings and commercials, and that led to eventually me doing commercials for Chorus Entertainment. For about a year and a half, I worked with them, and they shut down their office in Victoria. It was a little tiny, quiet office, and they shut that down, and I did advertising for my own agency. So me and two partners started up a small business ad agency. And in the course of my career, it was about a 12-year advertising company career. I've written over 1,500 commercials. We've produced, that includes like radio, television, print, and whatnot. We've produced well over 400 television commercials. And I really learned quickly about how to condense a lot of thoughts down into 30 seconds, into a minute. And it really helped me focus my writing. When we decided to shut down our advertising agency, it was back in 2008 when the big financial crunch happened. And the one thing about small business is when there's finances go sideways, then advertising is the first thing to go with a lot of them. So I ended up moving into consulting for social media and how to get advertising online for small business. So I would just consult and get websites up and get people started on social media. And I was one of the go-to people when Twitter first came out. And I was doing social media seminars and showing people how to use social media to their advantage. Uh, and then from there, I have just focused more on writing. So I used to have a bit of a theatrical writing career. I wrote some television scripts. I had an agent back in the early 2000s, and my agent screwed me over royally. I wrote a pilot for a sitcom, and my agent stole that and sold it to NBC. Uh, but they changed it enough, so there wasn't a legal recourse for me for that. So I moved on. I took it as a compliment and felt like, well, it was good enough to steal, and it did air a couple episodes, but they botched what I had written and changed it enough that it didn't succeed. And I can't even remember the name of the sitcom anymore. So I carried on, and then I had some kids, so I walked away from writing and just focused on the advertising and whatnot. But back during the 2020 lockdowns, I had nothing better to do, so I started my writing career again. I wrote a TV pilot called The Pillar, which is a sci-fi. It's going to be a miniseries now, but I thought, well, every single writer on the planet thinks they're good. Am I any good? I haven't written any television productions and any screenplays or anything for what it would be about 15 years when I picked that back up. So I entered it in contests, and sure enough, it won. And started getting good feedback. So I was winning a lot of the smaller ones. And even though I didn't place in the top 10, one of my biggest claims to fame on that script is that it came in the top 20 in something called Titan Awards, which is one of the largest writing competitions in the world. So I beat out tens of thousands of people and made the top 20 with that script. So that was enough to tell me that maybe I still know what I'm doing, and to brush up and get back into writing. And I'm focused challenged, which is one way of saying adult ADHD. So for me to sit at desks for 8 hours a day is a really difficult thing for me. But Spaulding's got me writing and writing and writing. And since I've been with Spaulding, I've written two television pilots. I am currently writing a feature film. I've got two other feature films written, and just going through some rewrites right now. So I've written three feature films and two pilots since I've been with Spaulding. So they're keeping me motivated. They're keeping me busy, and on top of that, we're creating a whole new television documentary based on tattoos. So I'm editing that and doing post production on that as well. It's a great bunch of people, and I really enjoy working with them. So I mean, it's worth it for me. Not just because it gives me an opportunity to write and get back into movie production, which I so desperately love, but also a bunch of people who have a wider vision and a positive vision, and they're doing really great things with all the talents and skills that they have. So I'm really excited to be a part of that. And like I say, everything I've ever done, I've had over 50 jobs growing up on Vancouver Island. Had my first job when I was 9. I worked for a tourist trap, you could say, doing bumper stickers. And ever since then, I have had about 30 jobs before I landed on a career. But every single one of those jobs has given me skills and taught me more. And so I get to utilize those skills now, and it's all come together. So now I take my advertising and PR and writing consulting, and I take all of those and I'm just pouring them right into scripts now. Yeah, on a more personal note, I've always questioned everything. I Just because somebody says this is the way it's always been done doesn't necessarily satisfy me. So I think that's played into a lot of who I am today. When I was younger, my parents were both alcoholics, so I would never know what I was going to get from minute to minute. Who they were changed from moment to moment depending on their mood and what they would drink, and so I think that lent it gave me the opportunity to learn how to be hyper aware and hyper vigilant. So even when I'm looking back on when I was a kid, they're having me think of memories from when I was younger. I've always been. Uh, I always questioned. I always questioned the way things were, traditions and way things have always been done. I with toys, I wanted to pick them apart and see how they work. And I want to do the same thing with people and societies and traditions. And I've always questioned, well, why do we do stuff the way we do it? And I was always shocked, even from a little kid, that people who are very entrenched in how they do things can't tell you why they do things. And that's always been a curious thing to me. Well, why do we do this way? And so I've always looked at the world from a different lens. I've always looked at it in a ways of how does this break up down? How does this break apart? How does society run? How do institutions run? How do churches run? And eventually, my avenues led me to God, looking into how things work. I've had a very supernatural life, and eventually came to the conclusion that God was real and I needed to understand that. And so I eventually came to Christ along. It was, oh boy, it was about 20, 30 years ago now, early 20s or early 2000s. You're asking me to go back and think about when I was younger and some core memories that helped shape who I am today. As far back as I can think, I always like to pick things apart. I like to take my toys apart and see how they worked. Stretch Armstrong, by the way, the toy, a big toy in the 70s. It's a gel that's inside of him. It's a red gel. Just so you know, if you're ever curious, don't cut them apart because they're worth hundreds of dollars now. But I took all my toys apart. I wanted to know how things work, and that sort of translated into how I worked with people. I wanted to know why we always did the things that we do traditionally. How does society run? Why does it run the way it is? Why does the government run the way it is? Why do churches do what they do? And the answer I always got back more often than not is we don't know. It's just the way it's always been done, and nobody ever thinks about it. And that was always a curious thing for me. So I spent a lot of my time focusing on communications and how people work, and learning how to be hyper aware of who they are and the little things that they do, to try and figure out why people do what they do, why societies do what they do, why institutions do what they do. And I've always questioned that. And looking at the way the world runs, I eventually, along with a lot of supernatural events that have happened in my life, which I'm not going to get into now. It's just too many stories and they're too long. But I eventually came to Christ in the late '90s, and I'm, back then I always, like, God was always a myth to me up until a series of unfortunate events happened in my life, and they were all very, very supernatural, and made it so I just could not deny the presence of God, that stuff was very real. So that has played heavily into who I am now, understanding God and understanding again how churches react and why churches do what they do, and learning not only my relationship with God, but learning about churches, and I started looking at the world in a way where I'm not sure a lot of people do, like pulling back the layers and seeing, well, how does this work and why does this do what they do? And that I think that helped me through 2020. I was very cynical right off the bat of the validity of what I was hearing about lockdowns and this thing. So I pulled it apart, and I it came quickly to my understanding that not all was what it seemed. And so you combine that with where society had been leading up, and for a good 10 years, and I'm just talking our country, our Canadian society. That's without getting into all the different cultures around the world. But I started watching things unravel for the last decade or so in Canada, and things were changing, and I started learning about history, and all my communication skills up until now has lent into what I've been doing since 2020. And trying to tell people that the world it's not surface. It isn't what you see before your eyes. There's more, and to dig deeper. It's also led, with my relationship with God, it's led a lot of times it's led us into doing trauma, and working with people with their trauma, and letting people know that that trauma is there and it's very prevalent in their lives, because there's a dark underbelly, and that underbelly needs to be exposed. And that's big. That is big with what we do. And so that led us to Spaulding, because not everybody at Spaulding believes what I believe, for sure. They don't have the same thoughts on the lockdowns and as we do. But that's okay, because their thoughts are their thoughts, my thoughts are my thoughts, and these are still a bunch of people who, regardless of what they think the world is right now, want to build a better future. And that's where we're here, why I'm here now today. So that plays a lot into it. And I believe that I believe God wants to build a better future. I think He wants to take this world back. He wants us to be awake and aware. And I think there is a bright, positive future, and we want to very much want to see God as a part of that future, because otherwise you get the PDDs of the world, you get the Epsteins of the world, and that is very much something that we don't want to see. So we have to build that better future. My life is more of a combination of a series of events, and it's not, some are big and some are impactful, but some events impact me in the moment. I do my best to adapt to new information. So as I gather new information, I take a look at my life and who I am in the world, and does that still work? And I try to reevaluate every at least couple of years, uh, because I'm learning. Well, actually, I'm unlearning more than I'm learning. I've been brought up to believe a certain set of things, and a lot of what I thought I knew turns out to be false. And so as I gather new information, I try not to get stuck or stagnant in who I was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because we're constantly changing. So we can get stuck so easily in anger or bitterness or unforgiveness, and you got to put that stuff in check. And so with the new information I get, does this hold up with what I used to believe, who I was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? That's not who I am now, because we're constantly evolving. And the last thing I want to do is get stuck and stagnate. And I believe we're always learning. And so I've never stopped trying to learn and gather information. Every event in my life is one more in the storehouse that adds, but I don't believe any one event was any bigger than another. They're all just pieces of the puzzle, and that puzzle is constantly changing and constantly moving and constantly adapting. And that's when when we stop evolving and we stop growing, you stagnate. And I don't know if life is worth living when you're stagnating. I'd rather thrive than live, right? What I'd like to see Spaulding um, get its place. That it's everybody's worked so hard, and I'd like to see Spaulding get its place, especially this place that it's trying to carve out in this world. I'd like to see that. Uh, we are continuing. I'm continuing on with the podcast with my partner Jody. We have had several conversations of what that looks like going forward and where's the best use of our time. But we also believe that people will be looking to a media that they can trust, and we're trying to restore trust in the media. And I think a lot of that's been shaken, especially over the last few years. So when people are looking forward to a better day, they're going to be looking for media outlets that are trustworthy and have integrity, and we're trying to build for that as well. So these are all things. It's hard to say what you can have your goals, and the second you make those plans, the world has a constantly shifting place right now, and we don't know what the world holds in 6 months, in 3 months, in a year from now. We don't even know what the world's going to look like because it's shifting sands all the time. We have to adapt with that. So right now, my goal is to write as much as I can and to get as many scripts done as possible, to finish our Behind the Skin, which is our tattoo documentary, and get that out there and get that into the world while working with our own media stuff and exposing lies and sharing the truth. When the investments come through into Spaulding, and when all that stuff comes through, I will have my hands full creating movies, and that I'm happy. I love that world. Everything, all of my experience has led up to this, and I've always been like all my skill sets. Who I am is always been in theatrics, behind the scenes, not performing anymore, but writing and being a part of that, and creating projects, creating movies, creating things that inspire. Like, I'm so excited to be a part of that. Words of wisdom. Like I say, I like to break things apart. I would say in the last 5 years, I've done hundreds of hours of research to understand how things work. How do we get here? How do we have a corrupt government? How do we have so many lies in the world? How do we get to the point where people are divided and they have no tolerance for either one another anymore? Uh, and with all of the problems that I see, and I need to explain that I'm not afraid of stuff, and we don't go with fear, and we don't go with negativity. We're just calling it out for what it is. We see what it is. It doesn't affect my positivity. It doesn't affect my outlook on life. But I like to know what's going on. And with all the hundreds of hours of research we've done, all roads come back to God. We don't go forward without God. And I think that's super important. People want to shut that down. They want to accept any kind of philosophy. They want to accept, like, you know, uh, any sound heals, or light heals, or I'm reincarnated. And the only thing that people don't seem to have tolerance for is Jesus. And with all of the stuff I see going on in the world, we have looked for every magic bullet to stop this that we have. We've looked for every solution to change world events that we can, and it all comes back to God. All roads lead back to God. And I know that church's PR is not good sometimes. I understand that, but God and church are two separate things. and and I'd say relook. If you used to have a relationship with Jesus, rekindle that. And if you don't, find somebody who can talk to you in a way that's not political or religious, and just talk to you about who God is, who my Father is, and in His heart. He's the Creator. He's everything. And so I would encourage you to relook at that and revisit that, because we're coming into a time that's going to be very difficult, and you need to learn discernment, but also have no fear. This, a lot of what you see is just smoke and mirrors. It's just theater designed to make you afraid, designed to make you fearful. So it's designed to make you compliant. um, don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of.